Welcome to Backbone Unlimited. My name is Matt Hartsky. If you're not familiar with who I am, I've been hunting and guiding Western big game for over 34 years, and I've been a professional strength conditioning and nutrition coach for more than 30 years. And I'm here to help you become a more successful and consistent hunter, shed hunter, and outdoorsman. In this episode, we're talking about how winter severity actually changes shed density and why it tricks hunters every single year. This is one of those topics where most people think they understand what's happening, but the results on the ground keep proving them wrong. They hear hard winter and immediately assume more sheds, tighter concentrations, and easier searching, or they hear mild winter and assume sheds will be scattered late and harder to find. Sometimes they're right, and a lot of times they're not. So we want to talk about that today because winter severity is a macro condition, but shed density is a micro result. And when you confuse the two, you end up hunting the wrong terrain at the wrong time, even though your logic sounds good. Every year, I see the same cycle. Big storms roll through late, snow stacks up, social media fills with talk about this is going to be a great shed year. Then people go out, walk what should be prime winter range, and come home empty-handed. Meanwhile, a few hunters quietly clean up, not because they got lucky, but because they understand how animals actually respond to stress. This episode is about breaking that misunderstanding. We're going to talk about how mild winters change movement, how harsh winters restrict it, why hard winters don't always produce more sheds where you think they should, same with mild winters, how stress changes travel and bedding behavior, and why die-offs and sheds rarely overlap the way people assume. This is not a go here, walk this episode. This is a thinking hunter episode, one that helps you stop guessing and start predicting sheds. So let's try to break it down. Winter severity is one of the most misunderstood concepts in shed hunting. People talk about it like it directly tells them where to go. Harsh winter, head to winter range. Mild winter, look higher. But winter severity doesn't work like a GPS coordinate necessarily. It's a pressure that reshapes behavior, not a destination. Think of winter severity as a force acting on the entire landscape at once. It doesn't push animals to a single spot. It narrows or expands their options, and shed density isn't about where animals exist. It's about where they spend their time. That difference matters. Animals can be present across a huge area and still produce very few sheds if movement stays high, or they can be restricted to a small band of terrain and stack sheds in one spot if movement collapses. When hunters fail to separate macro conditions from micro results, they start making assumptions that don't hold up in real terrain. A hard winter doesn't automatically mean more sheds in concentrated areas. A mild winter doesn't automatically mean fewer sheds and more spread out. What matters is how winter severity changes. Daily movement, bedding duration, travel efficiency, risk tolerance, energy conservation. Those are the variables that decide where antlers actually hit the ground and what that looks like in your specific area. Mild winters can be deceptive. On the surface, they feel like they should be great for shed hunting. Snow is manageable, access is easier, animals are more visible, there's sign everywhere, but mild winters often produce lower shed density when snow depth is shallow and temperatures are moderate. Animals aren't forced to conserve energy the same way. They can move further without paying a heavier calorie penalty. They can access multiple feed sources. They don't need to bed as long or as tightly. That increased freedom leads to increased movement. Animals travel more. They shift feeding areas frequently. Bedding locations rotate. Instead of tight loops, they operate across wider zones. Hunters often misinterpret this. They'll say there are animals everywhere, so there should be sheds everywhere. But presence doesn't equal density at the time that they dropped. If the animals aren't spending prolonged time in one place, antlers aren't going to stack there, even if you find them later on. Mild winters produce more evenly distributed sheds, not concentrated ones. And unless you adjust how you search, it feels like production dropped off, even though antlers are still hitting the ground. Hard winters flip the script, but not in the way a lot of people think. Deep snow, cold temperatures, and limited forage restrict movement. Travel becomes expensive. Every step costs energy. Animals respond by tightening their daily routines and minimizing unnecessary movement. That should increase shed density, right? Sometimes it does, but that's where hunters get fooled a lot of times. Animals don't just pile into the most obvious winter range because it exists. They pile into terrain that solves multiple problems for them at once: snow depth, forage access, thermal cover, wind protection, and security. That terrain isn't always where people expect it to be. In harsh winters, animals often shift into micro refuges, small bands of terrain that hold just enough advantage to survive. Those can be benches, timbered edges, wind sheltered bowls, or subtle elevation bands that don't show up clearly on a map. Hunters often go to the largest winter range instead of the best one. They walk miles of ground where animals pass through or stage briefly, while missing the smaller pockets where animals bed day after day. Harsh winters increase density, but only where animals are truly constrained. Stress is the missing piece in most shed hunting logic. Winter stress doesn't just make animals tired, it changes how they move, where they bed, and how long they've stayed put, and that directly affects shed location. Under high stress, animals prioritize reduced movement, predictable bedding, short travel distances, minimal exposure. That leads to longer bedding bouts and tighter daily loops. Step into the backcountry and step up your elk hunting game at Elk Camp 2026. This isn't a seminar, it's an immersive experience with real field training alongside successful elk hunters Matt and Saxton Hartsky. You'll learn how elk think and move, break down terrain like a pro, call with confidence, and practice 3 days of real-world elk hunting scenarios that mirror what you'll face on your own hunt. This camp was built to bridge the gap between where you are and where you want to be in the mountains. With limited spots and hands-on coaching, you'll walk away sharper, more prepared, and ready to hunt with purpose and confidence. Elk Camp 2026. Sharpen your edge. Register now and prepare for the season like never before at backboneunlimited.com. Antlers fall where animals bed, rise, and bed again the most, not just where they travel through once a lot of times. This is why in hard winters, shed often show up in places that look unproductive at first glance: timber edges, north-facing benches, sheltered pockets that don't look like prime feed. Hunters who only focus on food miss this entirely. Food matters, absolutely, but stress decides how animals use the food. When stress is high, animals choose security over abundance, and sheds follow that decision. This is one of the biggest misconceptions in shed hunting. People assume die-offs mean sheds are nearby. They find winter-killed animals and assume antlers must be scattered all around because that's where those animals were when they died. In reality, mortality zones and shed zones rarely overlap the way people expect. Animals don't die where they live best. They die where conditions finally overwhelm them. Oftentimes, that means migration routes, exposed slopes, fence crossings, windblown ridges, or marginal habitat they were forced through in the late winter. Antlers usually drop before animals reach that breaking point, so hunters end up searching around carcasses and wondering why there's no bone around within a mile. Sheds fall where animals stabilize and hang out and where they're enjoying life the most at that moment, not where they collapse. Understanding that distinction saves you a lot of wasted miles. After harsh winters, sign is everywhere. Trails are carved deep, beds are obvious, droppings are piled up, and hunters assume all that sign equals current shed potential. But much of that sign reflects movement that was under stress, not prolonged residence. Animals may have passed through an area repeatedly while relocating, staging, or escaping conditions, but that doesn't mean they spent enough time there at the right time for their antlers to drop there. If you don't separate travel sign from living sign, you'll hunt the wrong ground. Living sign is tight, repetitive bedding, constant orientation, short loops. Travel sign is linear and directional. Hard winters exaggerate sign, sure, but they don't always exaggerate shed density in the same places because they're not highlighting the living places where the animals were living when they dropped. This is where thinking hunters separate themselves. Most people think in terms of conditions: just snow depth, just temperature, just storm totals. But animals respond to constraints and stress: what they can do, what they can't do, What costs too much energy? So it can help if we ask better questions. Where is movement cheapest right now? Where can animals bed without relocating daily? Where does security outweigh forage? Which options have been removed and which ones remain? When you think this way, winter severity becomes information, not a guess, just based on information that you've heard indicates shed density. Mild winters expand movement and reduce shed density, right? Harsh winters restrict movement and concentrate sheds, but only in specific terrain that solves multiple constraints. Die-offs don't point to shed zones, stress dictates bedding, pressure reshapes everything. If you stop chasing conditions and start reading those behaviors, shed hunting becomes more predictable. Winter severity changes shed density, but not in single obvious ways. It's a totality of the circumstance. Mild winters spread animals out, harsh winters restrict them, but sheds fall where animals spend time, not just where they suffer the most. If you hunt assumptions instead of the actual behavior, you'll stay frustrated. If you hunt constraints instead of conditions, patterns start to appear. If you're serious about sharpening this kind of shed hunting judgment, that's exactly why I built Team Backbone. It's more than a membership, it's an inner circle for hunters who want to think clearer, read terrain better, and make smarter decisions when it matters most. Inside, you're going to get 20% off site wide on all Backbone Unlimited gear, the option to have a t-shirt shipped to your door every month, full access to the digital content vault packed with guides, checklists, and backcountry strategies, a private Facebook group with direct access to me and a community of driven hunters, direct call, text, or email access to me for personalized advice and automatic entry into monthly gear giveaways. This is built for hunters and shed hunters who want to move beyond surface level advice and actually understand what's happening on the landscape. Thanks for being here. I appreciate all of you. Until next time, train harder, hunt smarter, and never settle.